We're ready to get started. Ready for you, Dr. Kohler.
All right, Ms. Johnson, Hostler, board members, Dr. Merrill. We're before you today to begin the work and conversation of the process for developing your Board of Education legislative agenda for 2017. With me today is Courtney Crowder from Crowder Consulting, who we're engaging again to serve as a liaison for us at the legislature during this legislative long session. The way that we utilize and liaison with Courtney is he's down at the legislature on a daily basis, interacting as particular bills may be introduced or questions are raised that they want feedback from educators out in the field, liaisoning with other education advocacy organizations as well who may be at the legislature, including but not limited to the North Carolina School Board Association, other organizations such as that may be there as well. And then Courtney may reach out to us in the middle of the day and say, hey, a particular legislator has this question or wants to know. And so we're in constant communication with Courtney during the legislative session. And then what we will do is we will have a placeholder on the agenda for a work session while we're in the General Assembly's long session. Should there be a need for an update on bills that have been introduced to make sure that we keep you aware as the board of things that come up. But in between the board meetings, should there be something urgent that we need to make sure that we make you aware of before a work session, then we'll certainly develop a process to do that as well to keep you informed. So that's Courtney Crowder. Also, Dr. Julie Crane, who of course is on our staff, is working with me on the keeping abreast of government affairs issues as well. So we'll also be working to develop the legislative agenda. So today's agenda item, excuse me, is just to provide you with some samples of what's out there currently at the national level, the state level, as well as the local level of 2017 legislative agendas. In those cases where we don't have, excuse me, that's what happens when you speak 3 times for MLK weekend. But if we don't have the 2017 agenda for a particular organization, then we have their most recent version out there in 2016 in some cases. Then the last attachment that you see there is your last legislative agenda, which was in 2015, that went into the long session. So we just have those are not for discussion necessarily, but just for your information to know that as other organizations develop their agenda, we'll have those available for you as well. So again, sort of where we go from here is that we will be listening to you for feedback as you have discussion and develop what you might want for your legislative agenda, which will then be finalized and brought for your approval and official action item at some point as we go into the session. Courtney, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Sure. I think I would just point out that, as you know, the legislature convened last week for organizational meetings, established leadership, and begin the process of making committee assignments for the legislators. They'll reconvene on the 25th and begin in earnest sort of the long session. What will happen then, there will continue to be, as in years past, a week or possibly 2 where interim study committees that met over the legislative interim will report out to their corresponding legislative committees. That will of course include the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee, and as well as a few studies that went on as well. And so we'll have a chance to collect that information. From there will also be a number of early pieces of legislation filed. We tracked them all. And the report that Dr. Connolly mentioned usually focuses on those pieces of legislation that are both filed, but really spending the majority of the time on the bills that are actually moving. And then yet a third category of those where there's been requests for information or response from the district. And we typically have a sort of a quote-unquote rapid response process where we reach out and get that information as close to real time as possible. So that's what I have to add.
Questions or comments?
So in most years, there's a meeting where we meet with the WAKE delegation. Is that scheduled? When should we anticipate that? Because it strikes me we should have whatever our agenda, our legislative agenda is completed by that time. It strikes me that that's probably the time frame. Do you have any idea yet?
Not currently scheduled.
But we can schedule it once we get further along and you get your draft, at least the draft
Right.
prepared, then we can coordinate setting up a meeting with the WAKE delegation.
Well, but we usually don't get a call that, right? Because there's usually NC State's there, WAKE Tech's there, we're there.
Okay?
So I think they usually call it, which is why I think we need to be on the radar screen to be ready
When they
to
call.
act when called as opposed to call when we're ready.
Okay.
We were able to have our own,
We have in the past.
yeah, which we had reasonable participation from the delegation.
You're saying the morning breakfast?
That's when we
I
have
thought
them here
that
for
was a
morning
nice-
breakfast, yes.
I thought that was a good,
Yeah,
two different platforms to
right.
present our ideas would be helpful.
So,
So,
go ahead.
You would like us to try and get that calendar, that kind of event, or?
Two things, I think. I think one, to follow up on the one Dr. Martin is thinking about, just so I think it makes a difference. If they're not having it, then I think that makes our calendar, the timeline look a little bit different if they're not doing theirs. But I do personally, and I think I hear Ms. Kushner saying that I do think our breakfast was also beneficial because it gave us Wake County Public Schools one-on-one with those elected officials who attended. So I do think we should do both, but if you can find out if they're doing a full Wake County document.
Yep, we will, we'll find out, sort of what the plan is for that. From the delegation side, and of course. we can-
One other question I have for board members, you listed here a lot of great examples, Dr. Conley and Mr. Crowder, of examples of agendas. And I'll let Mr. Crowder speak to this more than myself, but I would definitely say we could look at several options. Like, we listed everything, kind of like our kitchen sink last year. So I'll take your recommendation. If you are recommending we do that again, or do we come up with, here are our top 4 or 5, which is really what a legislative agenda should look like, and then here's our page of support that looks like all the things that we support, perhaps maybe from School Boards Association or something similar. So you can think about it.
Sure.
But given this session could change any minute in terms of time frame for them, I want us to be smart and efficient with the way we do it.
So, possibly what we could do is just draft, for discussion, something that looks, like you described. And if we want to publish a full sort of dossier, if you will, we can do that, but otherwise, try to prioritize to the extent possible, things we're really pursuing.
That's what I'm here.
Yes, ma'am.
So how should we proceed on this?
Right.
Should we email among ourselves as a group ideas? Should we
So,
direct
what I
to
would
you,
say is,
coordinate?
Dr. Conley, you weigh in here. Do you want to start first on things you've heard us say that a couple things we already know that are going to be on the agenda, so those are things first to think about. For those of us who have been listening, Mr. Crowder is going to be our eyes and ears. I've heard strongly principal pay is on their list down there. So those are things that I think maybe, Mr. Crowder and Dr. Conley, you can give us a beginning, here's what we're hearing. And that way we can have something to respond to and prioritize. Again, the session is likely to change in their timeline, so I want us to be conscious and ready to be a little, as proactive as we can.
So what is the process to get these ideas aggregated? I mean, if there is a March map and a fall election for legislators, that means there may be new constraints on when they choose to stay in town.
Right.
If there's not, we still have issues that need to be addressed, and among them is what is the election cycle for this board, and putting together a recommendation to our delegation about how this board should be elected in the future that has broad community support. That won't be on their agenda, at the moment. So I do think the principal pay is a critical issue. Calendar flexibility is a mandatory issue. I heard from the president of the Community College Association at lunch today how much of an issue it is for them in the early college programs and coordinating programs across the 58 campuses, of the inability to match calendars with the public school system. And it may be reaching a friction, a level of friction where with the community colleges support and the higher ed support, and more than 60 school districts asked for it last year. I don't know if the dam will break or not. It just takes one senator to stop it, but I think it's something we need to push for. Our community is, I think, demanding it. And there are other things I could say. We keep bumping up against the inadequate compensation to maintain bus drivers and support personnel. There's a whole list. Calendar flexibility will help us greatly in terms of our academic program. How this board is election is critical to elected is critical to the continuance of a good governance structure for our county, and very important. So, and those, I want to move this thing along.
So what we can possibly do, Mr. Johnson Hustler, is from those, some of the samples that you see here in terms of some of those things that may be national educational issues, as well as some of the issues that are on some of the state agendas that have been published that staff believes, may be of concern to this board, we could bring those to you in draft form, including any items that you as board members send to me. Feel free to email me directly things that you as a board member believe ought to be on our agenda. And we can include those on a draft that we bring forward to you for your discussion and decision.
Okay, that sounds good. So if you all will take heed to Dr. Collins' feedback and send him any of your priorities, as Mr. Fletcher just listed a couple of things. How would you like that, Mr. Bloomberg?
One thought, and again, just to try, would be for all the board members to look at the School Boards Association agenda, and if there's something on there that you don't like, to let Dr. Conley and the chair know. Otherwise, that could form just the background stuff where you're saying, we support this agenda, maybe accept this and this. And then on top of that would be your high priority ones, which you all are talking about.
That is definitely my recommendation.
Yeah, and that may be an easy way to kind of move the ball.
And that's tended to be how we've done it in the
That's
past.
how we've done it in the
I think
past,
that's a
right.
good, very good starting point, and then for us to both underscore or perhaps augment what's already on there.
Like the Wake County Board of Education election.
Right, that's going to be very specific. Right,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Right.
Very well said, Mr. Fletcher.
And that's essentially what we're going to do. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions or direction from us, Dr. Collins?
No, ma'am? Good, thanks.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Next item we got for you is the student enrollment projections, and I'll invite Michelle Venditto, the Director for Budget and Management Services from the county, to join us up here at the table. She will take you through this presentation, and right now, as I look around the table, this group that's at the table right now heard this presentation at the facility.
And
Makes your job easy.
Madam Chair,
Any questions?
as we're pulling into the next item, I just did want to mention on the legislative one that in the last session, there wasn't an issue that I had that had a lot of legal aspects about it, and that I was able to get up with Mr. Crowder, and he was able to get me really good access to the key legislatures. It was very helpful, and I think it maybe made a difference, and so certainly want to compliment Courtney for being able to have that contact. So thank you.
And before we leave that, ask Mr. Johnson.
Yes, there is more, sorry.
As far as timing, I do feel a sense of urgency for us to get this done. Do we need to specify
If only you
by
were
the
there, we would
February,
Um,
first February meeting or work session?
Well, I definitely think we can be done by then.
Yeah, we certainly can have, as Mr. Bloomberg said, the items that are on the North Carolina School Board Association's agenda, and put together a draft for you. Again, I think it'd be important within the next week or so, if possible. Any additional items that are not on the School Board Association's agenda that is attached, that you would like us to include, send that to us, and we certainly can come back to the next meeting with a draft.
Because as outlined, feel like we have a rapid response process in place, and we have a placeholder that every work session we're gonna be updated. I think that's a good way for us to go forward once we have that draft document. So thank you.
And we can bring it for draft first meeting, and if you're very good and very satisfied with it, we can have it as an action item, but otherwise it'll come to the second meeting.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Sorry to prolong it. but-
I will add that this is just one part of several items that over the next few months you will be seeing as part of the update to the capital improvement plan. Of course, this is one of the drivers when we start looking at the new schools, number of new schools we go at this time frame. The next facilities committee will be coming forward with some, basically an impact with these numbers and new schools that we will be looking at and the target circles for those new schools. But for now, we'll go through membership projection update. Michelle, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. So it will be a rehash for some of you who were here last time, but just as I had expressed last time, I just want to share that this is a joint partnership work product between both the school system and long-range planning, Christina, who couldn't be here today, Wake County, and our budget office, as well as our planning office, and then as well as ORED and Numerix, which is Mike Miller also. So this is also, if there are very specific questions about the model, I probably will not be the person to answer them today. So, Joe, if you can go to Exhibit 1. Here, providing some historical information around how how the births that have occurred each year that essentially translate into a kindergarten class 5 years later, what that history has looked like. In 2009-10 was when we started seeing the enrollment less than what we would have expected based on live births, and that has been continuing and is projected up through 2020-21, and then growing thereafter. So this has had an implication in the model itself, and just that having those low kindergartens is kind of flowing throughout that model, assuming that those lower cohorts are flowing through.
And I think it's important to point out that that 2009-10 dip is when they changed the entry date from kindergarten from the
Yes.
middle of October. It was moved up to September 1st, so it's such a notable drop. I think it's important for us to explain that.
Yeah, and we'll put that in the, we'll try
Yes.
to make a note of that, sorry about that. So, right, that dip would have been a little bit more subtle. To Exhibit 2 here, just taking some of that live birth data from the prior slide and just sharing with you what the projection is, and that we are projecting live births to increase moving forward. And I believe that's at about 1.5%. We've included that estimate. So again, bringing that projecting that kindergarten enrollment to continue. In Exhibit 3, sharing with you the school system's market share. It was around 83% for quite a while, 83. And then over the past few years, it's been declining in comparison to where it had been. And essentially to the next slides, where an interesting discussion from last time of just where now there are some other options for families in Wake County. And so in Exhibit 4, sharing what the other market shares are. And so going from left to right, we have one each year from 2006-7 to 2015-16, actual market share, and then homeschools, private schools, charters for each of those years. And we can see, for instance, homeschools, 4.2% in 2006-7, up to 5.1% of the market share in 13-14, and then up 5.8% of the market share. I mean, these are small, percentage points, but percentage changes are a little bit more significant. Again, the charter schools growing as well, privates staying pretty constant.
Well, again, note here that we had the large influx of new charters opening in 14-15.
Correct.
Yeah, and some of that, yeah, based on history, is going to give, is likely to give a short-term blip because we often see charter return at the high school level. So we're going to see that dip, but then there could be a bubble down
And
the
from
road.
private schools as well, a return to
Right.
our schools, so demographically, it'll be interesting to see how that changes.
Which is why we need to be cautious in our taking numbers, right? Is our decline of 3% a long-term issue, or is that watching a perturbation trickle its way through the system? So we just need to be careful about our numbers, I think, for long-term projections.
I agree.
Thanks. Exhibit 5, our new residential building permits. Here, sharing just what the historicals have been. That the number of permits are on an upward trend. I mean, at some point that will level off, but at the moment, we're still on an upward trend. And this information, of course, is used by ORID in both just the entire system enrollment projections as well as the regional. And Exhibit 6, some information about multifamily versus single family. This to express that we're seeing that during the recession there was some, understanding that maybe families were in multi-family apartments, and so that was having a different impact just in terms of the data that was used in order to inform the projections. And here where we're seeing that the multi-families are declining somewhat compared to what they've been in the more recent past. And Dr. Martin, I think you had inquired about what did prior years, and so we're still going to see what we can get about that. Because as you can see in 2008, it was a relatively similar mix. So what had that looked like in the past? And so Exhibit 7, our unemployment rate, and just again to contribute to the fact that we are a growing county. Our unemployment rate is lower than North Carolina and the U.S., and we're attracting jobs, we're attracting people, attracting grandparents, families. And so Exhibit 8 is our historical student membership percentage growth. And again, seeing that before the recession, the growth in student membership was 6.3%. And then kind of decreased down into the beginning of the recession. Not decreased, but the growth rate decreased a bit. And so, and over the past few years, having 1%, 1.5% growth in student membership, which has been about 2,000 students a year, most recently. And if you take a look at Exhibit 9, just our total historic student membership, so those growth rate changes from the prior slide, here are what the total numbers are each year. So I mean, we're still growing annually, just got those lower rates of growth. And on slide 11, something that we looked at this year, our planning group provided us some data about kind of the shares for different age cohorts, I guess you could say. And you'll see that what we saw is for 45 to 54 and then 85 plus. I mean, and these are percentage of a total population, so these aren't total figures, but they are percentage of the population, and that those aged cohorts are growing, as opposed to the 5 to 14 through the 20 to 35 to 44, where those percentages are declining. So it's a piece of information that you can read it in a multitude of ways, but that just generally our population is aging more than.
Well, one question I'd asked at the facilities meeting is how that compared to the just national trends in the aging of our population. So there'd been a chance for us to look at that,
Yeah,
I think would be
we will.
helpful. that 5 to 14 is still pretty steady, as is, you know, just that school age population is still pretty steady.
And you've been nationally?
Right, I
Nationally.
would be interested in seeing how that compares just nationally to the, just the aging of the baby boomer generation and what that looks like nationally compared to Wake County. How does Wake County compare nationally, I guess?
Wake County is 5 years older now on average than it was 20 years ago. It was 29 point something 20 years ago. It's now 35.
30 years.
It does not mean that the number of younger people are fewer.
Right?
It more likely means that the grandparents, people are staying here longer and grandparents are moving here to be closer to the younger population. But the median age has moved up to 35.
35 from 29.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Thank you.
Slide 12 has our comparison of projections, and here, one that we do this every year, we meet together. For the CIP 2013 is your topmost graph line there, peaking at 192,546. Then we have the projection conducted last year, your second line down, and then your last is what we've just conducted. And over the, I'm trying to remember, this was Christina's slide, we have about 4,000 fewer students projected by 2025 than last year's forecast, and 17,322 fewer projected by 2022 than the 2012 forecast. So, just compared to last, our projection has declined. Mr. Fletcher, you had, I believe it was you who brought up, yes, the school system's enrollment has declined, but the number of students perhaps over the whole system. So just, I think, getting at the point of there are just now more alternatives or options, and what did that look like? And I know that Mike sent out an email today with what that looks like. I didn't have a chance to really explore it. So we will get that to you.
Do you remember when we changed from nodes to individual parcels in terms of the database that drives this information?
That I don't know.
Because I'm thinking that may have some impact on the difference in the accuracy of the current projections.
Last year, I think was the first year.
Okay, so the
the
current projections are using somewhat of a different real estate model, which might account for some of the variation from the 2012. You change the inputs, you get different outputs, you know, I mean, it's,
Those lines are
It
still
happens.
going up.
we still have a bunch of kids who are moving to Wake County.
I've done a little bit more looking at the data file, the numerical data file that was sent. I don't think it matters that much for our current level of projections, but I do have a question about the long-term projection. I think we've underestimated
Okay.
in this projection, because when I look at the cohorts, there's something that changes in the projected cohort based on the numbers in the table that was sent to us. There's a bit of a dip in about grades 3 through 6-ish for the later years that is not reflected in the earlier years. And if you look at the 9-12 differential, we've been closing that 9-12 differential, which is what we want to do as we have more success with students. But that differential gets large again past, I forget what year it changes. But when that gap getting larger again is in the inverse direction of what we've been working on with graduation rates and a lot of other things. So I just have a little bit of question in the long term. So I would actually not look at the green line and the yellow line as probably substantially any different. But I don't think that matters for what we're talking about right now, but for long-term thinking, I think these current numbers may underestimate.
The 2016.
The 2016 line. Again, we'd have to dig into the nitty gritty to argue that, but.
Okay.
And I can share those graphs with anybody.
Yeah, that would be helpful for us.
Did you hear Dr. Wood? She said she'd like to.
Yes, I did hear.
Okay. So lastly, just in summary, there's been just an increased loss of the projected membership, as you've seen in today, to non-Wake County public school programs, particularly charter schools, and that included virtual schools that I didn't speak to specifically, but there have been, I believe, 2 virtual schools that some students have been enrolling in. Wake County live births are projected to increase, continuing the trend of recent years, so that will have impacts on the out years, as well as the expected reversal of a flat kindergarten trend for the past few years as the live births continue to grow and migration increases. And again, kindergarten is projected to increase due to those live births. We've seen students returning at the higher grades from non-public schools, as well as an increasingly aging population, which is all layered in, and we believe revealed through the projections. That's my presentation.
Additional questions, comments, feedback, and as she stated, we all teach you something.
Again, you will be seeing this on an annual basis.
Well, I think also one of the things from the committee meeting was how close we've gotten to our projections are running pretty close to what, as we refine them, they're becoming, it's an effort and a successful effort to be more accurate. That's, I mean, that's our goal in all things.
Better than hurricane targeting.
Right. There you go. Or ice. storm.
Or ice storm.
It is still January, do not speak of that. That's right.
I know, because this is that calendar. Who's that calendar?
Come over to my house every kids next time.
That was fun.
Where you going?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Casale. Thank you, Mr. Pinto. Good to see you. Thank you.
Yeah, Michelle, thank you for coming over to
The slide hall owes you one.
Yeah. Then we had 5 days.
Yeah, well, that's fine.
All right.
Good afternoon. As a reminder from the email I sent you earlier today, we made a slight revision to the order of slides in the presentation. So when you pull up both of the items, the one with revised in the title is the one that we're working from. Same information, just a different order of slides.
Could you give me a bit more, I'm sorry, can I indulge for more time if you could do that, because I think I called up the wrong one.
Okay.
So you want us to look at revised?
Yep.
Is that, okay, that's clear.
So we'll start and end with the same thing. If we have agreement from the board moving forward with the themes, our plan is to have these be an agenda item on the next board agenda at the first board meeting in February. It is important that we get consensus today to have time to use the 3 weeks between today and that February board meeting to work on the magnet grant application. If there's not consensus today and we need to come back, that delays the ability to work on that magnet grant application. And turn it over to Brian.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy
New Year.
So as Kathy had mentioned, we're having a continued conversation that we've shared for the past couple of months about the new Magnet Schools Assistant Program grant. As you know, we just had one grant cycle that's began and ended last year. This is new and anomaly to have one back-to-back. These changes in this new deadline timeline are the result of the ESSA Act, the Every Student Succeeds Act. Please note there's not going to be another MSAP grant cycle for another 5 years. And in November, the board unanimously approved the 4 schools that were identified. And we have some of the principals here today, so I want to say thank you for being in attendance. They are Bug Elementary, Lincoln Heights Elementary, Millbrook Magnet Elementary School, and Southeast Raleigh High School, all very, very proud schools. Last month, before the year closed out, we brought to you 10 potential themes to be discussed for these 4 schools. Based upon your feedback, which was tremendous, in your direction to seek greater guidance from the teachers and the school community at large, we're here today to provide a proposal based upon the individual themes for each of the 4 schools. I'm going to turn the table over here to Dr. Cochran to talk about our next steps and provide a presentation. Excuse me.
Thanks, Mr. Kingsley. Good afternoon. Over the years, Wake County, I've shared this slide a couple of times before, but wanted to put it up there again. Over the years, Wake County's received over $45.5 million from the Magnet Schools Assistance Program grant, and this year there'll be a potential $15 million that we could win. As Mr. Kingsley shared, we brought the 4 schools to the board for approval in November. In December, we brought the 10 potential themes, and the U.S. Department of Education released the regulations for the grant. And today, we're bringing you the suggested theme for each of the 4 schools. From now until the grant's due, we'll work with the schools a lot on developing their themes and writing the grant. And the grant's due in early April, and we find out if we get the grant at the end of September. We've shared these grant purposes with you before, but just wanted to remind you that the purposes of the MSAP grant, including the Every Student Succeeds Act regulations, that overall some of the wording has changed, but those have stayed the same. The MSAP grant requirements, these are the official requirements for this grant cycle. When we met previously, we had to operate on our best projection of what the new regulations would be. Number 2 is the biggest change from previous MSAP grants because it adds socioeconomic integration and not just minority group integration to the grant. So we have adjusted our magnet selection priorities to be around socioeconomic status and not student achievement, which overall will give priority to the same students. Whenever we're looking to write schools into the grant, we want to make sure they're in alignment with the Magnet Schools Assistance Program purposes and requirements, but we also want to ensure they're in alignment with the Wake County Board adopted magnet principles. Over the past several years, we've added 10 new magnet schools. This grant, we want to use this grant to rejuvenate 3 of our existing magnet schools, with the exception of Lincoln Heights that we would be remagnetizing. These 4 schools were unanimously approved by the board to be part of the MSAP grant in November. So because the grant regulations came out between the target market parent survey that you saw in December and the school community survey, and the mandatory STEM requirement was removed, and because of feedback from you, we added several other themes to get feedback on, such as Montessori, museums, gifted and talented, and we combined some themes based on your feedback. This pie chart is a result of the feedback we got from each of the grant schools. We're going to show you one for each of the schools. From faculty, parents, students, and the school community. The people, this particular pie chart is for BUG, and the people presently at BUG seem interested in environmental connections and computer sciences and robotics. This next slide is Lincoln Heights survey results. The people presently at Lincoln Heights like environmental connections.
They have an environmental STEM program now. They have a STEM focus on environmental.
Yeah.
I think we need to be careful with numbers and language, because I think what these show us is not singular or even dual interests.
Yeah.
But they show a lot of what we talked about in the meeting is these look an awful lot more like electives that would be great to offer at a school as opposed to a full school theme. So I think we need to be careful. I suspect if you put error bars on these, you'd see plus or minus 5 easily, which is going to mean that it's not a thing that people are interested in.
It's probably have to look at several factors in determining what a theme would look like.
So at Millbrook Elementary School, the people from the school like several of the themes almost equally. And at Southeast Raleigh High School, the people at school like University Connection School of Design, Art, and Engineering. These are the results of the survey that we sent to our target market parents that we shared with you in December. When we sent these potential themes to parents, the grant had a mandatory requirement that your themes had to have a STEM focus. This year, that regulation is taken out, but many science and technology type themes remain popular. As you can see, all of the themes received a lot of support, with Academy of Computer Sciences and Innovation receiving the most support, and with University Connection School of Arts, Design, and Engineering a close second. This is helpful information as we finalize the themes for the 4 schools for the grant.
I want to ask a question. It's a little bit of a follow-up to Dr. Martin. You don't have to get into the details of the survey, but I am curious to what degree did the questionnaire explain magnet versus, oh, these would be a series of electives that we're interested in?
The survey had both the bullets that you saw in December, had each of the themes and the bullets from the survey.
Had a description for each of the themes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we look at the theme as a school-wide theme. So it may be that there are some courses like electives that come from it, but there are also ways in which the theme gets integrated across the school. And that's the work that happens as we write the grant and implement the theme.
Yeah, I get that from this perspective. I'm thinking that for this, I'm going to speak specifically to elementary. Elementary, you have brand new parents, right? So magnet and elective don't necessarily mean any real distinction. And you have a K2 parent who's brand new if it's their first child. So I guess I'm speaking more so at that level of, yes, you know the difference in how you're going to work it out, but I think it goes back to the way you see at the elementary level, you see that those are not that, I mean, there's not a lot of significant difference in what parents voted on, and my guess is some of that is based on parents who are like, oh, these are great electives, yes, we want all of these, versus thinking through the integration of magnets. So that's why I asked, was there a description of distinction? I'm just curious, just because these numbers are so low to the line. Ms. McCaffrey?
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, especially with the elementary, speaking to that, I mean, you see a lot of schools that are going more towards project-based learning, and, you know, what do children do? They can connect with their environment, they can, you know, have a garden, and you can bring those things like, from the outside, from the environmental class, into the classroom, and kids can, you know, I mean, the biggest recyclers in my home are my children, because they really can live and breathe, and you know, they don't have that gray area, and so at least with, I would imagine with Bug and Millbrook, where you already have a magnet population, they would be able to make that distinction. Rather than, you know, just seeing like, oh, well, we're going to go to environmental science class.
What they've been provided would be the descriptions that went along with each of the themes.
Sorry.
Okay. As we shared in December, we use a multitude of criteria to select magnet themes for schools. The 2 sets of survey data that we shared with you above are only 2 of the criteria we use to select magnet themes for schools, so that we can come up with a shared commitment from all stakeholders. We used input that the board gave us in December on potential themes to narrow and fine-tune the themes. And we have to make sure with theme revision schools that the new theme is significantly different from the previous theme. And finally, we have to make ourselves as competitive as possible for the grant by adhering to evidence of promise standards that the grant requires. So the Bug community had computer science and robotics and environmental connections as their top choices for themes. The target market survey data showed that computer science and robotics were at the top of their theme choices. This would be a new, very competitive theme in our district that could help Bug meet the grant criteria of reducing minority and socioeconomic isolation, and you can see some of the components that, you know, that's just a snapshot of what we would look at for that school.
So
Lincoln
can you help us understand that just a little bit? So having written code in my life, I understand that that's related to learning language, that's related, whether it's English or second language, it's related to math, it's related to logic, very clearly can be integrated. But like I heard in my BAC this morning, right, the more we ask teachers to develop new curriculum, because a lot of this stuff isn't out there, that's a lot of time commitment without a lot of compensation. And my gut from seeing students regularly, not many elementary teachers, let alone chemistry majors, have actually ever taken a coding course in their life. So I can see value in this if it's done well. Pushing little blocks around on an iPad doesn't really count as coding, I don't think, in a great coding sense. That works for this little device at this time. So I guess my question is, let's just take this theme, right? What's the strategy to give some of the, comprehensive coding instruction to all of our staff so that we can incorporate it? Because the last thing we really want to do is pull something off the shelf and sort of slap it on, right? If you coding, it's great. It's a great thought process, but it's very design and logic oriented, and almost a whole curriculum in itself that requires a lot of background to do well. So some of that's going to come out of the magnet theme, but I'd just like to hear some of the thought behind what it is we want to do. It's easy to say, I want a computer and coding robotics school. It's a different thing altogether to actually make it happen. And so I'd like to hear some of what your envisioning goes into that, given that it's so different than our normal elementary ed training.
And so I think what we find whenever we embark on a theme like this for magnet schools is that there's a large portion of the funding that's received that's targeted towards professional development. And it is not necessarily during the school year. It might be during the summer. We are compensating teachers to do it. There's a portion of the dollars that also goes towards the curriculum and the resources and what's created versus what might be purchased or collaborated on with a community partner. But that's what the funding is used for. And it's also, I think, why it's a multi-year cycle, because it takes a long time to make the transition around this. And there may be some components that are less of a lift to get in right away, and others that will take much longer. I think the grant cycles now are 5 years. So that's where you see most of the money going through. I mean, you guys are happy. Please chime in on other stuff.
My question is a little bit more than dollars. I mean, do we have a partner like with Red Hat, with Citrix, like Lenovo? Who's going to bring the coding level of instruction? I envision it sort of the same way that I'm doing chemistry professional development to a lot of chemistry teachers, which is, they're like hands-on, here's chemistry curricula kind of thing. Who are we targeting as a partner to, get our teachers as students up to speed in the logic and thinking of coding? Do you understand my question?
Yeah, no, it's a good
Well,
question.
Brentwood served as an example with their engineering magnet that I think after, it took years to build that up, and I think it's now, it did
And
slowly
Laura
become.
Bottomley, I think it was from
Yes, and
NC
so I
State,
think
was
there some
that
partners
key
in
that I'm
that
talking
place.
about.
Right. I think exploring the partners that are in our backyard is absolutely mission critical to the success of a school like this. When you explore some of the other similar elementary models for computer science type design schools, they have some organizational backbone to it that provides coaching to teachers across curriculum areas to help provide integration that's somewhat seamless. It doesn't replace the existing curriculum that's standards aligned. MIT is one that comes to the front of mind that has written curriculum for K through 5 to help integrate this across all curriculum levels. We've explored that. There's, the premier computer science schools in the country are in San Diego right now and in Wisconsin that have similar models to this. We have explored the backbone of that at high levels, but we would really look to see if this is something that the community wants prior to going all in with a partner like that.
So my reason for raising this issue is I've written enough grants in my life. And when reviewing, you're going to get two completely different perspectives to say this is the idea, the theme that we'd like. And, you know, we've got the partners who are going to help make this happen. These are the things that we're going to try to do. And I personally would like to see us, because I'd like to see us be successful, right? I'd like to see us have mapped out a little bit stronger what that partnership might be, who the players are, what our thought framework of development looks like to integrate, rather than just this list.
Yeah,
That's
we
fair.
don't want to get ahead of ourselves either with bringing these and bringing names of potential partners prior to having a thumbs up about going with these also. So we want to.
But they're integrated,
yes,
integrated,
yes,
right?
I
Because if
understand what you're saying.
I could agree with it if I know there's a substantive partner. If there's not a substantive partner, then I worry that we're going to create something that doesn't have a chance of success, and then I can't agree with it.
Yeah, we have a
Does that
partner
make
on a
sense?
limited basis with one of our schools that's currently doing some coding as a magnet school, and we would seek to either expand that or move into larger arenas.
As part of the grant, just having taught at the elementary level, is this something where you envision more of a push-in with instructional technology teachers to assist those teachers who, as Dr. Burton said, may need that additional help, at least for the first few years while we get traction? Is that?
We would definitely be writing into the grant instructional technology teachers. In this present grant, we have one that works with all of the schools that we have, and we plan to write in one for each school just because the amount of technology
That's
is
a
required.
steep
to help
learning curve,
teachers.
especially with this.
So I have a follow-up. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mr. Smith.
So to be clear, I mean, because I think what I hear you saying is that you're looking just for some sense of direction from the board on this, and then if there's a thumbs up or a sense of direction given, could it be that then you come back with, for example, a logic model rather than say a PowerPoint presentation that gives us a little bit more information around what the inputs are, what the activities are, outputs, outcomes?
The logic model actually is the first step of us writing a grant that we're working with the grant writing company and ourselves to do that. So that's exactly what we do once we have the themes nailed down and can work with them on that.
Then I think that would help all of us, like, you know, address some of the issues that Dr. Martin raises, but at the same time, I guess gives you some, if that's what you're looking for at this point. So maybe that's not clear, but certainly lots of knowledge would be helpful.
I think that gets at one of my questions. The second question was maybe a general question. So I'm a little bit more like Dr. Martin, spend my life writing grants. So I want to go back to something to clarify what I heard you say, Kathy. So I guess I'm more in line with Dr. Martin. I would assume you would be thinking about these partners prior to writing the grant and not afterward. Not that you have to solidify them, but I would imagine it's a much stronger application, and it's clearly much stronger to maybe a handful of us if we have a sense that we indeed are going to have some community buy-in. I think, you know, you bring up a good point of exploring curriculum that are already there, like, you know, a premier institution that you just mentioned, that we could use that. But I also think there's something too, and I think a couple of us have said this in the past, of using the industry that's here. I think that two things for me, and you'll get tired of me saying this. One is community investment, because we're asking them to invest in our schools in a meaningful way. But the second one is also more about the logistics of them being in school and can provide some ongoing support to teachers. Very similar to what Dr. Martin does, is hold PD, you know, outside of what we do for them as an incentive for our teachers and our students. I think it's beneficial. So it's more of a two-part question. One, is our structure such that we write the grant, then look for the partners?
No.
Okay, so please clarify.
No, I think we haven't started writing the grant yet.
Right, I understand.
As soon as we get thumbs up on themes, we want to include partners in the grant, yes. And that's our plan. So preliminary conversations that we may have had with folks will turn into solid things that are in the grant.
it's a requirement as part of the grant to have partnerships, strong partnerships.
Okay.
And I think this is the theme for me that I find kind of piggybacks to what Dr. Martin was saying about, having extra, not extracurricular, but enrichment classes. You go to, this is the room where we do computer science, this is the course that we have for robotics, and so maybe it's the name of the theme where I'm not seeing how this is going to integrate at the elementary level with literacy. How are we going to do literacy with robotics? How are we going to do, math comes a little bit easier, but when you get into science at the lower school level, it's, the water cycle, it's, social studies, you're talking about geography, compass rose, mapping. How do we do that within the context of computer science and robotics so that the theme is integrated in those? And that's maybe, and again, maybe it's the fact that it's called computer science and robotics. And maybe, if it said like STEAM or computer design or, design thing, something that could be, I think that's the issue that I'm having with this, because computer science is this course where I go to this room for, robotics is a club, or it's this course that I go to in this room. And so that may be the issue with this particular one for me,
That's
that I'm
exactly what
seeing.
prompted the question.
Whereas environmental's connections, I see a theme that the school falls under that umbrella.
So okay, I
If
get
I
it.
can give just a little example of that, right? Writing a story is not unlike writing code, right? You have to have the idea, you've got the introduction, you've got it. I learned Pascal, right? You wrote lots of different sections and then would call on this section. So coding is a great process for lots of thinking, whether it's writing a story for
Right.
literacy and these kinds of things. But that's a curricular strategy that is very different than what is taught in our LA classrooms. And that's what I'm saying. We don't just need the technology, we don't just need the devices, it's a different way of thinking and teaching that, you mentioned the word, design thinking.
Right.
Design thinking is really fundamental. But computer technology, by the time these kids graduate, is going to be completely different than what it is today. So, but the thinking, right? Pascal is not used today, but because I learned Pascal, I can read code today, even if it's a different language. That's the thinking level that we've got to get incorporated, and so that's going to require partnerships
Agree.
at a deeper level than just here's how to use this software.
Right.
I think you hear us on that. And
I hear you
perhaps
saying
the-
that.
And I do.
It's
agree
how
with
you,
the
it's
psychological
how a
thing,
whole
give us some of that.
school-wide theme that's also about the skills and not just a course or an elective
Right.
Right.
that's reflected through the title of the theme.
Right.
And that's the intention. So, yes.
So at Lincoln Heights, the school community strongly wanted environmental connections as a theme. The Millbrook School community was open to several different themes, and one of them was environmental connections. With Lincoln Heights being in the southern part of the district, having environmental connections at Millbrook Elementary as well would give students in the whole district access to the new environmental connections theme. And at Southeast, the Southeast Raleigh community strongly supported the University Connections, School of Design, Arts, and Engineering, and the Target Market Surveys strongly supported the University Connections theme. So this would be a new, very competitive theme in our district that could help the school meet the grant criteria, reducing minority and socioeconomic isolation.
Yes.
So, particularly in the Southeast, I very strongly like the design, art, and engineering. My question is the university connections. I don't want us to get into the situation like we did with the leadership academies where we promised a university connection before we had any partnership agreed upon. And so my question is, what university are we talking about? Most of the universities, as we learned with the leadership and early college issues, universities are sort of maxed out providing, their own job. We had the university connections at Centennial Middle School that never really gained traction even though it's on campus. And so I guess my question is, do we have a real specific university connection partnership that we're looking at? And/or why do we add that? Why don't we just let it be a School of Design, Art, and Engineering?
We do have a specific university
Okay.
that we're working with on this one. And we have, and this is, we have reached out to the School of Design as well as the engineering school at the university, and they are on board.
Therefore, you're suggesting NC State?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. She even wore her red flag.
Very good.
Ms. Kushner?
Can I ask a question about pathways? So I was glad to see that Millbrook and Lincoln Heights will share a theme that then could split the district. And I'm assuming with Bug changing from creative arts and sciences, would we do the same with Douglas and Wendell? Or can you clarify? And then on the IB, moving IB out of Millbrook, what happens to that pathway? So I guess my question overall is about how this affects overall the pathways that we have in our magnet system. So I'm glad to see Lincoln Heights, Millbrook having a very clear splitting the district and being able to work on that new theme. That's exciting. So what does that mean for the creative arts and sciences, which I think are successful at Douglas and
Right.
Wendell? As well as IB, I'm a little, it
So we
seems
wouldn't-
unclear to
yeah.
me how IB is affected.
So we wouldn't be changing the themes at schools, creative arts and sciences, where the theme is successful and has a draw.
Okay,
They would stay.
good.
Fox has picked up the IB Primary Years program, so they've got it there in order to continue that pathway onto Millbrook.
So we have elementary IB, can you refresh my memory? We have it.
Farmington Woods.
Farmington Woods,
Smith.
Smith. Okay. And Joyner did and no longer, Joyner kind of, sort of, no?
Yeah, they do the
Okay.
combined IB and
Okay.
languages.
Their
So we
combined
have-
IB language, yeah.
Okay, all right. That makes me feel better, thanks. And on Douglas and Wendell will be the creative arts and
Yes.
sciences, and they seem
So they'll
robust, and will they then split the district, or is that to be determined?
I think we'll have to take a look at whether or not that leaves a gap in terms of following and what parents' choices parents make.
I'm excited for environmental connections. Just, I see that as like big draw for the elementary set and kind of as we're moving into new technologies and that. And stewardship, I think it's a great idea.
We'll just get whatever board is here when they're up and running, ready to talk about how they're gonna fund all solar panels on our
That's
schools. Because it's gonna be like recycling. I mean, I
Yeah.
do agree with Ms. McCaffrey. I mean, our kids are our best stewards of the changes that they learn at school in our homes that we didn't have access to, so just preparing the next school board. Mr. Sutton.
Going back to Southeast Raleigh, as conversation about partnerships, are we limited to, given technology opportunities for blended learning, online content, that sort of thing, are we limited to university partners that are just here in the area?
No.
I mean, is it, I know it's possible, but I mean, realistically speaking, would they need to be logistically here in the community where there's the physical presence there, or could it be?
That's not a limitation. It is certainly possible to explore partnerships as you get into some of these that there may be interest in outside of the geographical area, sure.
In addition to
That
what-
could be as strong as or do you foresee or envision a possible partnership that is as strong as a local partner that's right here? Is that?
Well, it's kind of like, we have one early college that's a tri-partnership, the one between Wake Med, Wake Tech, and Wake County Schools. And I think that there's, as in the same arena that you're talking about, there's greater room for there to be more than one partner associated with how we look at this moving forward. I think that's it's
Not
something
just the room for one partner, but again, using
for a collaboration.
online and technology, even to blended learning type models.
I would say
What
that-
we're learning over Crossroads Flex now is
Yeah.
that something that's a real possibility of something that's
I think
worth.
it is.
It is. I think it's, I would say technology and the distribution of devices across our schools, especially where we are with our high schools, is no longer a limitation, but we do have to support our schools in understanding and take advantage of technologies in that way. I would say that's an assumption right now that that would just happen organically, but I think that's no longer a limitation in terms of their capability of doing it with the technology they have, and that'll extend through their middle schools through the second semester of the school year, where they'll all be 3-to-1 in each of our core classes.
But we do still have some work to do on the front end around being ready for that kind of an environment. We're not
That's
really
all.
there.
So
But we gotta
have
watch
looked-
out.
Have we looked at designing such a learning environment that would be conducive and beneficial to that? That's assuming we're not quite there yet in terms of the design of such a learning environment.
I think that's the work that we are doing, but we're, we're still playing, we're just playing catch up. We're still playing so much catch up. And it's not for everybody, it's not the best way always, and so how we integrate it into the overall academic programming in the school is really important. But it's a point to consider for sure.
And so be careful looking at the data. UNC Online is finding over and over again that the online is not generally a good way for the standard college student. It's good for many returning students who already have some of those discipline skills to be able to get it. But for your freshman and sophomore students in particular, the failure rate is very, very high. So the whole value, I think, of connections is actually making the physical connection. And so I'd like to see that. I will be interested to see a little bit more fleshed out what the university connection means. I'd like to see it be, really something.
Connected.
Yeah, real connections, yeah.
Not just a name.
But I also would encourage, I know, because I talk with her a lot, what, Teshni DuBrois is doing at Shaw, trying to, really bring sort of that back to Shaw's old glory. Yeah, and I think doing some really great things there. Anyhow, so NC State, obviously, I have a little bias toward, but the university connections for a school are probably going to be beyond any one school. So again, I'd like to see what the partnerships looks like beyond paper.
Okay.
I do want to ask a follow-up to Mr. Sutton's. So I'm curious, again, going back to grant writing, you're going to have to write it, you have 3 weeks. But I am curious of how much flexibility of growth does the school have to partnership, right? Like, so it is what it is. We use the university you've already worked with, let's say, all is well, it starts to flourish. But indeed, what if, you have a partner that says, hey, we have a cohort group of students that we really think would benefit from the Fashion Institute design, that we could actually do some online partnership with. Like, is there room for those schools to then start to say, well, let's develop, I'm giving a specific example, but I really do mean in general.
We do have to submit updates every year.
Right.
So
Okay.
we can certainly submit changes, expansions, all of that is a part of the process.
And I bring that, I hadn't thought about it until Mr. Sutton brought it up, but I'm just thinking there are a lot of very specific institutes that indeed, I'm going to speak more at the high school level, that when you start to see students really flourish in something, it does benefit us if we have that kind of flexibility to say to the administrator, hey, let's absolutely capitalize on where you see some real growth and potential as options outside of what we're already giving students. I think that is a huge benefit if we know up front and say to the administrator, I'm going to say specifically for these because I can think of specific institutions that could really be beneficial, and then also a next step for some of those students. So that's good to know that there are those opportunities for growth and change.
Okay.
Ms. Cushman?
I want to ask about the national analysis y'all seem to do with Magnet Schools of America, as well as reviewing other districts across the country. How did that inform where you all landed for these themes?
So the University Connection School of Design, Arts, and Engineering was working closely with the Magnet Schools of America to come up with that theme. Also, the environmental connections is one that other districts have successful magnet themes of, and we don't have that yet, so that was definitely something to look at. And the computer sciences and robotics, actually in this grant just this past year that we wrote and didn't get. That was one of the themes that in one of the winning grants for that at the elementary level. That was very intriguing to us that, you know, because you hear about it lots at maybe middle and high, you know, and what we did with Reedy Creek, but it was very intriguing to try that in elementary.
And since you brought up Reedy Creek, Athens Drive, I can't remember the third one that was Carroll that was in the previous grant. Are we able to help those schools further develop, either with this grant or in another greater, you know,
So we
version
did
of-
identify funding to provide support for the professional development and training that needed to happen, even though we did not receive the magnet grant for that. So we will continue to work through that.
for going forward,
Yep.
as we hoped. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So we will, we're gonna mess around with that title of that the theme for bug a bit. Because it really occurred to me that the environmental connections, that the word connections is kind of what ties that together in the other one. So we'll play with that a bit. We understand the need for looking at how the title supports the overall theme and what it actually looks like in the school. But the plan would be to bring these themes, whatever that title might be, February 7th. The grant is due in April sometime, and it just allows us the time to go ahead and work longer on that.
Well, I didn't hear any objections. You're not asking for a vote, but I
Yeah.
feel like you got a verbal
Okay.
thumbs up from most folks. That's better than anything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, when can we talk about magnet transportation?
Oh, that should be on the list.
Mhm.
Mr. Fletcher nicely put that on the forecast to remind us we should be talking about transportation, so. I think this is
Should we
what
ask
here is
Mr.
that we
Moore
want.
when we
I
can talk
know.
about magnet transportation?
We should.
So, well, let's take that under advisement. There is work going on, there is collaboration going on between magnet, student assignment, and transportation around the feedback that we've been getting, and we're angling towards needing to present that to the board, we know. And so, but the work is, we're doing some work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. That means we'll hear from you.
Yes.
We can count on it. You stay with us?
Yes, I'm sitting right here.
So if we
And
can
I
have
have-
magnet questions?
I have lots of support. I have lots of support around that I'll call out in just a moment. So the last item that's on our work session for today is an update on and a discussion of a WCPSS summer camp audit. And I will, we can just take that down.
We'll ask.
Okay. You can drive it. You want me to drive it?
Yes, yes, that was.
Okay.
And
So, to give you a little bit of background on the WCPS summer camp, if you look at the first slide in the presentation, we actually talked to the board about it first in February 2016. And staff was discussing taking the places where the summer camps were happening in our schools, and there's about 5 of them, but there were a couple that weren't going to be able to have it in summer 2016. So our thought was, due to some information that had come to our attention about board approval regarding student fees for summer camps, a need to involve risk management around the oversight of some of the activities of summer camps, that we should pull back from summer camps and then look at how we should implement them, or if we were going to implement them, what needed to be done. There was considerable concern in the community from those families that were relying on and planning on the summer camps, so that we determined that instead of not having camps in 2016 this summer, what we would do is have them, but ensure that the places that were of greatest concern were addressed prior to the camps being implemented. Namely, that we take a look at, in particular, the questions that were raised in risk management, primary one having to do with swimming activities that were part of the summer camps, and working with our insurance carriers to make sure that we had good answers and moving forward, that we felt from a risk perspective we could engage in the camp over the summer. So,
May I just add
Yes.
a little more context?
okay,
Some school principals had implemented programs to serve families in their schools. And they were not widely known to many board members and administrators. So it was kind of a surprise when this issue came up. And are they okay? Are they not? How are people being paid? I mean, all the way down to, you know, who's paying for it? Who's handling the compensation or taxes being withheld? I mean, all kinds of things came up. And so what had happened is some principals were serving their community, and parents had said, we love this. Now, whether it was inappropriate competition with the private market, there are a lot of dimensions to it, but it kind of started out there. And as the parents responded to the possibility of those camps not being held, we started to learn a lot more.
so we determined that we would conduct an audit, that we would ask our audit department to go and take a look at the different aspects of the camps so that we could have really a good look at what was happening and have some questions and recommendations that might come out of that audit that might inform how we move forward. So the audit was conducted by our internal staff, Tim Kennedy and his staff, and Tim is here. If we have any questions about the audit summary itself, which is a relatively short document, it's one of the attachments from today's presentation. And the kinds of things that were examined in the audit report included the history of the camps, what the revenues and expenditures were. There's an attachment about that. Sort of a brief overview of the academic programming component of the camps, what the human resources structures were that were used to employ the staff, what the risk management factors were that we had to consider. These camps were located structurally within the organization in the same department that before and after school programs had been located. And so they were being treated similarly to before and after school programs, and that's actually a decision point and a question moving forward is that where they belong? Should they be like before and after school? Are they distinct from before and after school? And that'll be part of what our discussion is. The budgetary structures around it, were schools making money off of this? How were they planning the budget for it? The fact that these camps were not a part of the community schools use program, but were being operated independently of that primarily. And those were all of the parameters that we were taking a look at within the audit. When you take a look at the audit, there's a paragraph, short paragraph on each of these that provides a little bit of information around what was found. Mr. Kennedy and his office talked to a number of folks, talked to area superintendents, talked to the principals, to gather the information about what was happening. And when you look at the end of the audit, there are some questions for the board to consider. And we start with these questions because the answers to some of these questions lead us to how far we delve into the questions and the recommendations in the ensuing pages. Right? And so the very first question is, does WCPSS want to be in the summer camp business? And
Can I rephrase that question?
Okay.
Does Wake County want their families to be fully invested in their schools? I mean,
Including-
it is the other side of the coin.
Right, including the non-school programming time.
Right. I mean, so is it a community center that provides support at parental expense during the summer months, or is it just there for the 10-month academic program? So that I think is the stark contrast between the two questions. Do we want to continue to serve? And I think this came from a couple of principals I talked to. We want to continue to serve the families who are in our school through the summer months when we're not in an intense academic environment, or not, and require them to get their summer services someplace else? Or is it, if it's at least a break-even situation, does it make sense to open the school up to the community with the properly managed program? So that is the question.
Well, I think it's worthwhile to think broadly, right? Because we're enthusiastically developing the partnership between the YMCA and one of our schools on the Rockport Road site.
Right.
Is that the same? Is that different? How is it the same? How is it different? But there's a lot of, it strikes me, there's a lot of parallel. And so I think part of the question is, does education only exist during the 9 or 10 months of the school year, or does the relationship become equally part of education, which goes beyond that?
And these programs, they were mostly staffed by Wake County system employees, not YMCA.
Correct.
But we're also looking at what do we do at our ESM schools that might be more holistic, deal with childcare issues in the summer and other things. We hear from any time we look at a calendar with gaps in it in a predominantly low-income school, we hear a lot of concerns about intersection childcare. And is there a model that says that the school can be more fully utilized by its clientele that is supportive to the academic program as well as to the families that are members of that school? So, I mean, I'm sure there are 18 layers of questions under that to create all kinds of issues and rah-rahs and also oh-my's. So it's not a simple, straightforward question.
I don't want to answer that question. There is a model.
Okay.
So there's a model.
Where's the model?
I think it's one that DPI has been promoting, the whole school, whole community, whole child.
Well, there's the whole child, and at the policy presentation last week, the NCSBA program, I have a presentation on it right here about the whole child program, which is interesting, and it's not really being implemented anywhere in North Carolina at the moment. They're early pieces of it, but nobody's really got a holistic application of it yet. So, do you want to share anything else about the whole child model?
I don't know if I'm qualified to do that.
Okay, all right. It's not unlike a lot of the things we've talked about with the ESM schools and how do we serve that community more fully by employing and bringing in sister agencies within the county and the private sector as well.
Well, and the closest probably.
That's moving in a little different direction than simply saying parents who can afford to support a program financially, should they have the opportunity to do that in their base school?
There are more elements.
They start to get a variation on that grid.
There are more elements of the whole child work that you actually see in our collaboration with the Y right now, because we're starting from scratch, right? With a large community stakeholder group as well as a partner in the Y and then the Wake County Public School System.
And that's something that the School Board Association shared at the regional meeting that was in Roxborough back a few months ago that some of us attended. So that was where that came from. So I know that the state board, maybe state board, I think is pushing that, or DPI and or both is pushing that model.
Yeah, you know, I've taught at a school and again, not in a large school system where they had their summer program and that was viewed as an enrichment thing and encompassing that whole child piece. And it's really amazing to see the relationships that form between those teachers and the students that may or may not have ever had that. You know, you may teach a class on, they would do like go into the woods and just explore, or, Hogwarts Academy, and they would, pretend that they were, wizards or, and just to see the connections that those kids could make with those teachers and how it built those relationships. And as far as the pool goes, I mean, are they just going and letting the kids swim, or is there an instructional model? Because, it's, I don't know. I mean, in New York State, we had to learn how to swim.
Correct.
You're
not required to do
and
it
that
in North
was
Carolina.
the curriculum with school-issued bathing suits.
I remember.
That was a
Required
whole
at
other
UNC.
story. But, you know, I mean, I think it helps build those things.
It's a safety issue as well as
It's a
a lot of other
safety
life
issue,
skills.
but, you know, I mean, we have a lot of water around
No,
here.
I'm saying it's a safety issue to learn to swim. I'm not saying I'm worried about the school, I'm saying that it's a safety, you reduce childhood drowning.
Yeah.
Many schools actually have swimming
Right.
instruction.
Right, and, you know, I mean, I used to be a swim instructor and lifeguard, so I'm probably the wrong person to not be biased about that, but I think it's a good thing if we can give that on to kids at a level that they,
Manage the
but
risk.
it is a huge risk to the school system, and I also understand that as a liability, but yes.
So I guess, oh, I'm sorry.
I wanted to go ahead and answer that first question, because I do like Mr. Fletcher's way of looking at it, is building community and extending those school communities, or as Ms. Mahaffey said, is building those relationships between the teachers and the students that are at those schools. So I do value that we're doing this. I do think we need to have a fair process that's fairly systematic across the district for our schools offering these summer or intersession programs. And it should be fair both to parents and to the district. So I welcome that we're going to have this opportunity to create a process that's fair. But I do, and whether it's the whole child model, it might be that at some of our schools. It might look different at different schools. I would like for us to have the breadth of flexibility that schools can develop the grassroots what they need. And I do like the question, I would love for us to talk about it as a board as to whether they should be academic or aligned to our strategic plan and in what ways. And as far as water, don't we have like a form that when I filled out the field trip form, you have to check the water thing? Can't we just, does that not cover it?
We had a process this past summer, correct?
That's right. What we did this past year, we found out that some of the summer camps that were using community pools, some of those pools required waivers from us, but we were not taking any waivers from the parents. And so we put in place a waiver that we asked that be signed for each trip that, well, we used just a beginning and an end date. Excuse me, looking into it a little further this year, they recommended that we take one for each day. We can work around that.
And we should go ahead and follow the policy. I mean, we should go ahead and follow the terms of the policy if we're going to continue to do it. Yeah.
Can you introduce yourself?
Sorry, there you go.
My name is Cecil Bell. I'm Director of Risk Management.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
This is, we have a party of folks that we're all,
But I have no idea who this is.
we have a party of folks here that we're all a part of contributing to the audit. And Cecil Bell Risk Management is here. We've got Linda Wilcox from Community Schools here. And then Tim Kennedy in the audit department. So we've got Mark to some extent the financial and those folks. So I just asked them as they gave us feedback. We've got some area soups here as well. Nicole just walked in from academics. We asked for some feedback on the audit report itself to extend those findings and ideas and recommendations as well. So we asked that they would be around in case a question came up that needed a response.
Thank you.
So I'd like to sort of leverage question one is, can we use this as an opportunity to provide more opportunities? Because what we know about education is opportunity and exposure is why there's a correlation between achievement and poverty. When I look at the schools where we're offering this, they tend to be our non-low poverty schools. It strikes me, and we have to be careful that in terms of competition with other providers, there's laws that we've got to follow around that. It strikes me we do need to make sure that we go through the community and school license and fee structure that hasn't always been being done. Those are the kinds of things that we ought to do. But is this an area where we could, if it were more system-wide instead of school-wide, it's got to be operated at the school-wide, and there's got to be a lot of school control to build that relationship. But if we can operationalize things at a system level, is this an opportunity where we could let the Western Wake schools help subsidize our ESM schools so that we can provide opportunity? there's a lot of richness in here that I think it's an opportunity to ask, what can we do, as opposed to say, are we okay? Can we? So I like to look at it as opportunity, and can we leverage opportunity?
How would a Western Wake school subsidize an ESM school?
Because if we have,
He asked.
Yes, how would we
a Western
subsidize?
Wake school subsidize an ESM school?
we have, if we have a county-wide tuition schedule that pays for X, the cost would need to be
Like a sliding scale.
for the system. What you, the individual, would pay would be a sliding scale, so that, you know, the higher income is gonna pay a higher dollar value, probably still gonna be competitive because of how we operate with our schools, and that can now provide, those fees can now provide funds to run such a program in an ESM school.
And I actually heard parents, when they came to us a year ago,
Say they'd be
saying,
willing to.
saying that, giving that as an example and potential for how this could operate. I mean, it was the parents who thought through how we could have system benefits, system-wide, to having a larger system of
So,
of
But would that
opportunities.
not set up an unintended consequence of a comparison of a have and a have-not school?
Well,
So
I mean,
would
I
think
think it
about
needs to
more
be,
like our
depends on how
goals.
it's set up. I think you've already got that possibility, right? Because if you basically say a school can run it if they can run it on their own, your school that already has a high PTA and strong engagement is gonna have not a big problem in creating that. A lot of our ESM schools are struggling to get the parent involvement, the community involvement. Teachers are already dealing with a higher workload, for lack of a better term, and so they're less likely to have the time to create new programming. So we already have
So if we
have and
already
have
have
not.
that, I can't see why we would set up a structure that would then further perpetuate that.
So I
I
guess
don't
I
think I'm
don't,
suggesting further perpetuate, I'm suggesting use resources from A to help B so that C, being the comprehensive, can do more than either could do on their own.
I'm not saying yours suggestion, that's why I said I think that might be, or might wind up being an unintended consequence of something like that, perhaps.
Kathy's wheels are turning, and Mr. Fletcher.
Well, so I want to capture what I'm thinking, I'm hearing Dr. Martin say, that depending on how the fee structure is set up, that there is room within the district processes and procedures, similar to how the Y already implements a sliding fee structure for families that are participating in their track out or summer camp programs, that would allow for a similar recognition on the part of schools and students within schools, because you might have the same school operating the camp that it's always operated, but if you're using a sliding fee structure, then different kids would be paying different amounts based on what they're able to afford. The schools are not making a lot of money off of these camps, as you see. They're making a little bit here and there, and it adds up over several years if it's not being used. But when you look at when families choose to not participate in summer camp programming, if cost is a factor, it's, you know, generally what you find are older siblings or grandparents or others that may be watching children during the summer. And so if the fee structure is set up in a way that allows for us to ensure that in any part of the county, depending on where these are located, there is opportunity for that. And it might mean extra dollars at the district level that have to come from somewhere, depending on how it's set up. But I do believe that our attorney would want to review how we set up that fee structure and make sure that.
This is not something we can.
Well,
sit down
the
here
law
and
so
solve.
far has been that, you know, you can have fees waived based on inability to pay. So, you know, that is already in place. That's definitely a more comfortable place right now to be, that, you know, you'd set up situations and there's the fees for the various camps. If you can't afford, then that can be waived. But creating a whole sliding scale would be a different model that I would want to look at if that's the direction that the district wants to go into.
So I'm gonna let Mr. Fletcher.
But let me just
Okay,
finish. I
sorry.
think
Go
that
ahead.
the last thing I want to say is that, so what we're looking at here is how could this be a district program that benefits students across all areas of the district?
Right.
The, if I'm not mistaken, correct me, Kathy, if I'm wrong, please. the before-after-school program is apart from communities and schools?
No.
Or is it within communities and schools?
Well, Linda, Erica.
It's not part of communities.
It's not part of communities and schools.
So the fee structures associated to it, to communities and schools, are not in place for this before-after program. The schools don't pay anything for the use of their facility
Right.
for this
They
program.
pay
Correct.
an indirect cost.
They pay the indirect costs, which
Right.
these camps pay as well.
Right, but there's not a rental fee per se.
No, I think when we, and that's part of the question around whether or not the summer camps are situated in the appropriate locations structurally within the organization. Before and after school care has always been seen as an extension of the school day for families. And a summer camp program is a little bit different because the children are not in school at all.
Well, it's an extension of the school
Year.
year. So I'm open to figuring out if there's some way to support families in their relationship with the school. That if there's an academic component to it, that might just be a result of asking the principals when the program's set up to pay attention to that opportunity, as opposed to simply campfire building or whatever they may choose to do during that time. Although there's a great deal to be learned from learning how to build a campfire, I must say.
Maybe not on school
Maybe
grounds.
not in the classroom. But, so, I mean, this is a conversation that I think is important for us to have conceptually around the more holistic engagement of our community. And I don't know how the money has to work. I do know that the schools these programs have been in were likely, my guess is, and we talked about this, our guess is that back when local school-based decision-making was the mantra across the state, that some schools decided to do this. And others did not, because it was a local decision. So whether we have a program like this in 100 schools or not, I think is less important than saying what is the structure for them to exist where they are wanted and needed and can be sustained. And if we can figure out a financial model that makes them more feasible in more places, then that's good too. So
So generally,
I'm not suggesting that we need to require anybody to do this, but rather to see it as an opportunity for better engagement.
Oh, and I think, going back to the waivers that were or weren't in place, to have, local control but district oversight, we have these facilities that have a maintenance schedule and if facilities isn't aware that there's a summer camp going on or you could be a little more,
Well, that's why 2 of them didn't have camps,
right.
because they were going through HVAC replacements.
so.
But there is a consideration around the portion of the facilities being used, any wear and tear on the facility, or maintenance that has to happen over the summer. And I think that is a concern around how we do or do not engage community schools in this process. So the general feedback that I'm getting from the table is that, to Mr. Fletcher's flipped question of how do we engage these schools who may want to engage their families in a way that supports them during this time, that there's generally positive feedback around yes, that's something we would like to do.
Yes,
Okay.
2 things I thought I'll add, and I thought Dr. Martin was going to add one of them. Mr. Fletcher touched on it and Ms. McCaffrey, maybe not starting fires. But I do, I guess for me, and so yes, that's my reason for wanting to support that is community support, school support, and most importantly, the investment from our parents and families. But also, we've talked a lot, at least Dr. Martin, about like what does curriculum look like and how do we give kids exposure outside of you're going to sit at a desk and learn this thing, but making sure that it's hands-on and creative. I think for me, this is an example for us to give kids who are interested in the exposure that we all talk about through summer camps. We talked about this, Kathy. The cost of summer camps, as a parent who's still paying summer camp costs, is enormous, but most people who can afford it are doing it for those exposures so I can still go to work and those things can still happen for my student. So those are for me all the things that I would also want us to keep in mind. I get personally from me, I'm speaking for Monica Johnson also here, yes, it's gonna be a cost to the district, but I think the long-term benefit is student outcomes. When we have them and we're giving them the extra things that we know they need during the summer, that includes, I see Miss Elliott sitting over there, our issues around summer feeding. We have them, we know that they're eating, we know that they're getting what they need throughout the summer. And that's all of our students, right? I mean, regardless of socioeconomics, a lot of people say, oh, well, you can go stay with Aunt Monica today, and Aunt Monica's gonna be like, oh, just watch TV today, right? I mean, that's just a reality. So for me, this is a, I think, multi facets that can benefit our students in their outcome. And we touched a little around the equity piece, but I think I want to shine a light on that also is a reason for us to be discussing this. Because we've talked about it around, I'll draw us back to changing the calendar for our schools, and the clear voice we heard from some parents who were saying, well, I'm going to withdraw my kid from the school if they're going to be in school year round, or what we were calling an extended year calendar. We weren't giving those parents an option, so those parents were saying, I want to exercise another option of removing my kid from that school. So I think that this can meet several issues that we've discussed if we build it in a way that our attorneys will look at, you all will look at in terms of a financial model, but I do think we have to also be clear and hear and uplift all the ways that this can be a benefit for student outcomes, which for me is in line with our strategic plan at the end of the day. So I just wanted to shine a bright light on that. And Ms. Kushner whispered to me, but hopefully she said to you all, it also increases the buy-in from parents to our school system if we're giving them opportunities that don't exist in other choice options.
Well, and as a teacher, it allows you, to kind of come out of your zone in your classroom space and explore things that you might be interested in, that you'd like to teach, that you can't always. And, we're seeing a lot of pushback from the era of testing and, seeing things like, Richard Lou's Last Child in the Woods and wanting those enrichment and more exploratory pieces. And I think it shows to the community that we are open to that, and we don't, we're not just here for EOG scores. And I think nobody at this table or in this room would say that we were, but sometimes the perception of schools, especially with the grading system that we're all so fond of, could kind of make people who aren't here, make it seem like that's all we're looking for is academic outcome.
Well, and to also piggyback on that, it allows our teachers an opportunity for their additional compensation.
I thought that's where you were going.
Such a percentage of our teachers, I can't remember the exact percentage, but a good number of them need and want second jobs. And do get them outside of us. So again, capturing our students more fully, capturing our teachers and their employment needs more fully, those teachers that want to keep teaching or want to have that second job, still be teaching, giving them a platform to do that with our students. I think that's all.
And the outlet of not just strict curriculum.
Correct, right. Being able to experiment with some things that aren't on the standard course of study. I think so. All that is what we've heard what teachers would like.
Legislative agenda.
So
It all circles back.
So we've hopped around a bit on all of the questions on this page, quite frankly, as we've been talking.
Yes.
So I'd like to summarize where I think we are, and then just include a couple of thoughts as I'm summarizing. The general overall feeling is that we take advantage of an opportunity to engage our parents during the summer. That being strategic about the content of what's happening during the summer camps is important, and something that staff would need to take a look at. I will say, as we're looking at the content of the camps in the summer, that we're going to have to look at a little bit bigger picture, because we already have other camps going on during the summer with Read to Achieve in place, Title I summer school in some of our higher needs areas with at-risk students. And so how does that work with what this would look like? And because this is a straight 7 to 9 week, every single week that you're out during the summer kind of camp, and we don't have any other program in the district that goes the entire summer. I think in terms of the water-related activities, there's a sense that, again, if it is strategically and we're covered with through risk and liability, that's not a no-go, but it's let's figure out what it takes and if we're in agreement with whether or not we're going to do it. And I think we need to take a look at our school board policy that's currently in place that says no water-related activities and figure out if that needs to be addressed.
And some substantial legal questions.
There is a lens towards looking at what the equity considerations are in terms of how these are located around the district and who is participating and what the opportunity cost is around doing it. We talked about that there is cost associated with this, and initially, as we were talking about how you come up with a district-wide model and a funding model that allows those that aren't able to pay an opportunity to participate, and the notion that this might cost more, I want to be careful that we're not committing to something over and above and beyond even our existing budget process for how we commit to funds in the district and what our priorities are and where this lands in those priorities. Okay?
And I hear you on that, but I'd also like us to be creative. And sometimes I think we get a little bit too stuck in, this is the way we operate. When this conversation was coming up, there were quite a number of parents who said, we'd be glad to pay significantly more than what we are currently paying. I don't remember any specific dollar values, but I remember hearing significantly more to give this opportunity to more people. That doesn't fit in on our normal model. But let's not be stuck to our normal model. That's exactly what I'm calling for. A growth mindset, creative mindset. Let's think outside the box. This is an opportunity, I think, to be pursued.
Again, this is coming from a small district in New York State where we had a Parks and Recreation program within the district that dealt with summer camps and these enrichment, adult ed pieces. And so again, that helps bring the community into the schools. And so I think that's always a positive thing for people. But
well, and maybe we partner with Parks and Rec.
right.
I mean, there's absolutely no reason why we might, just like we partner with a lot of other joint use agreements. The sky's the limit.
It really is. I mean, again, it touches on a little bit of the things that we try to talk about in our food security group. So it just reminds me that you're right. I think there are lots of opportunity and options, but we are going to have to be creative about how we enter into those agreements, realizing we do have some fiduciary responsibility.
And fair to the district, right, fair to the responsibility of the district. I think
Absolutely.
Johnson Hostler just said it.
So we did not forget our responsibility to the district in this conversation.
Okay.
Well, make sure you hear us say that.
If I may, I don't want to rain on the parade, and what you're saying philosophically, I think we all bless wholeheartedly. But my budget hat is on this time of year, and the only way I can give this fair consideration is to put it on the table with everything else, because it won't be cost-free, in spite of what families say they're willing to supplement. So I think I've got to try and put a price on this somehow, make it a business case, and put it out there with everything else. So, because given what you're going to have to balance in me too, this may not be something that gets funded the way it does today when it's not competing with anything else. I just think I need to try and put a dollar wrap around it somehow so that it's part of our bigger picture. Because we got caught a little bit last year trying to support continuing initiatives. And I think some folks across town had trouble understanding what our continuing initiatives were and this and that. So I just ruined your
Yes, you did rain on the
euphemism,
parade.
but
You're just
it's the financial reality right now.
Hard dose of reality.
So, because I'm having a hard time seeing how it would be cost neutral.
Can we work toward cost neutrality? I think
Well,
that's the brainstorming we have to do. What would cost neutral look like?
And what kind of partners do we
I don't
need to
know.
do that?
I just don't know how I move money from these parents to these parents.
Well,
That's a big
I think for me
chasm.
it's less about moving the money to parents, which is what Mr. Sutton was saying, but it's more about how you build the cost of infrastructure, which is going to be some creativity, right? So I guess I mean, it is raining on my parade, but we had the parade in the rain or snow.
I'm not saying it's, I'm not saying
So I think
it's a
it's
bad
possible, I guess.
idea.
Oh, I
It's
hear
like
you.
a second tier of our system
No, agreed.
that gets at kids through a different lens. I mean, it's great stuff, but we're not flush,
Right.
and that's what bothers me.
No, I hear you on that.
So we will try and figure this thing out, and remove as many limitations as we can. But it's thorny feeling, but it's still a great thing to try and figure out.
I can't see Mr. Witter's eyes back there, but I'm like, infrastructure, cost infrastructure, less about parent movement of women.
Well, the YMCA, we can also partner, right?
That's what I meant. Who are those
YMCA
partners?
partnerships, Parks and Rec partnerships, those are,
And we do already with both,
exactly.
and we
Can
can
we
probably
expand
push them
those?
harder, which could then affect cost again. And
Right,
what
and
parents have to
and
pay.
I think I brought this up maybe in exec that, the Y over the last 5 years have done a whole lot to reduce their costs, but it's been very, isolated at certain schools based on whatever their decisions are. I think mostly where they have their after-school programs built in and they're not our after-school programs. But again, the model is there where they've somehow miraculously, maybe, I don't know if it's community commitments or grants that they're using, but that's the other piece. There are tons of grants out there, especially when we're talking about building in some curriculum pieces into that. So I think it's just exploring the creativity, not just on our side, but asking our partners to also be creative on what that looks like. Because they have a lot more, flexibility and less tape to go through.
As many of these are going to end up going through community schools, I would assume, in some form or fashion. Before you can do a cost infrastructure analysis, you have to have an infrastructure to analyze. And we don't have an infrastructure to do the program. So to your point, we're going to have to figure out what that looks like first.
Oh, that's what I was saying to Mr. Wood.
To be hypothetical, you'll have a number of hypotheticals to compare. Because we're starting a small number of off-the-radar camps in this discussion, trying to figure out how to replicate that. There's just there's plenty of room for creativity because it's a big blank piece of paper.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was actually echoing to Mr. Winter, is there is a huge window of creativity opportunity to look at. I mean,
Sunny
again,
side, yes.
that is the sunny side.
Stay on the sunny
Well,
side.
the realistic side too is timing as to when anything would get rolled out.
Yes.
I'm not sure that we can come up with an idea that should be in this year's budget, for example. Now, what does that mean in the interim to the programs that have sort of been in operation? I think we're gonna have to be as comfortable as we can in some never land until we figure some things out. So at least I am not suggesting, I think that it should be a budget case necessarily in this year's, I mean, if that works out, fine. But I think this is something that needs more thought and planning and not just, let's see if we can't quickly put it together, if that is
Yeah, I
fair.
thought you were being very ambitious with this budget. It's like, well, sure, work it out if you can.
Well, I just didn't know you would be that patient.
Yes.
Well,
Good
I guess
work
for
takes
me,
time.
I recognize to Tim's
Yeah.
point that
Yeah.
in order to be creative, we're asking you to do something that doesn't actually exist. And we're also asking you to do it being fiscally responsible as a system, but clearly open and willing to flexibility to the community. Those are not three easy things to combine. However, I believe you all are brilliant. So,
You remember that, you remember that you could have a good, fast, and cheap pick two?
Yeah.
Yep.
There will be the companion question.
I care about one.
Me too.
Of how the existing programs are encouraged to move forward.
So,
So you
looking
next
at existing programs moving forward,
Is that your
if we
cue?
can flip to the next page.
Yes.
So whether we're talking about the existing programs or a bigger thing that we're working out, some of the hard recommendations that came out of the audit included some sort of routing form where different folks and stakeholders and accountable parties sign off that they've reviewed whatever needs to be reviewed in order to make sure we proceed. I think that we were all in agreement that that was a good recommendation and one that we should have in place. Just since there are little pieces everywhere around, are the trips, have they gone through risk management, the hours, the HR pieces and the staffing and all of that, just to make sure that everything is signed off on. In terms of risk management oversight of activities, the question was, should they take a look at it? And risk management has weighed in, yes, we want to. We want to sign off on this and make sure that the activities are in line with what we can and can't do, and that we've got permissions in place as needed, and that we're covered. So I think that is a recommendation that we would agree with as well. I'm going to pause between each of them, see if there's any questions or feedback. The departmental placement of summer camp, at this point, I think we might need to sort of defer that a little bit until we figure out the bigger picture of what it is that we're doing. It's 3 to 5 schools right now, I think, if the Davises come back online this year, maybe 6. And so we can incorporate that as a part of our overall recommendation to any changes or anything that we might do moving forward. But I don't know that there's any need to respond to that immediately unless somebody feels it to. And then whether we continue to model it as before or after school or distinct from before and after school is kind of tied to how we place it departmentally and what the goals and the vision is for this moving forward, I think, as well. So. And then the reporting requirements, which I thought was interesting as a recommendation, is if we incorporate that there is a goal or a vision, a standard around how these camps operate, should there be some sort of reporting requirements or post-camp sort of measurements, like progress monitoring of did we achieve, what were the number of students that attended, what were the outcomes that we intended to get out of this, and what do those requirements look like? Don't have hard and fast answers to what that might be, but I think it allows us to keep up with year over year whatever data we deem it's important to keep up with year over year. So, and we'd have to figure that out. What is it we want to keep track of? And then how do we report it on a yearly basis?
Where do our Read to Achieve and some of the other academic camps that we do sponsor fall in some of these procedural issues?
Well, because Read to Achieve is a distinct set of kids coming out of a distinct section when they're academics, it's pretty tightly held. But they work very closely with budget and finance to work out the budgetary model, and so that folks get paid. But they don't have some of these other things where they're leaving campus and they're going on trips. They have a tight academic model that's developed within academics as well, so they don't have questions about what the programming is. There's just some features, it's much narrower.
Prescribed.
So,
But I guess one question I have is, in thinking about what we capture, is that a place we can look, since it is, at least, at the very least, already defined and you're already capturing? Because I'm thinking there have got to be pieces that you're capturing that will help us, in regardless of how this summer camp is structured, long-term, whatever that looks like, that would be aligned with our strategic plan, that we're actually saying this really is a living document. This is creativity, that whatever those indicators might be.
I want to go back and take a look at what we're capturing for Read to Achieve, because we implemented it as a statutorily obliged sort of thing.
We have to legislatively.
So,
Has reporting requirements. And
but there are some, but they're very, the total number of students who qualified, how many attend, how many go.
Numbers. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's numbers.
The reporting that I'm almost more concerned about is HR-related things, fiscal use, building use, and so on. Yeah.
So I think in terms of direction and next steps, the jury's out on the part of the question at the end of the first one in their current format. I think we are recognizing that there are perhaps some changes that will need to be made, but to what extent and how quickly depends on what we're trying to do. And I think that what staff is going to need to do is bring back some scenarios that implement the feedback we've gotten about how to continue that and what it might look like. Whether we're operating something, if we're inviting a third-party vendor to come in and take it over. And I think we'll know in the next couple of weeks whether or not we're able to model sufficiently to meet an ambitious timeline versus figuring out what we do for another year while we take more time to develop before we implement. And we've had some conversations offline about options for what this could look like moving forward. And there's lots of different directions we can go, but I think in general, we want to make sure that we are fair to the schools and the families around the program that has existed and what it needs to look like moving forward, that the costs are covering both our costs that have been going in as well as any other costs that have been deferred or not accounted within the model, and that we ensure that our risk factors are addressed on the front end and taken care of. And then the long-term solution in terms of what happens with these programs versus the equity considerations across the district is a bigger piece.
There's one more bullet on the bottom of your list, and that's the potential impact in terms of staffing other system-run programs in the summer. Agreed to Achieve, Title I, you've already mentioned. Is there a potential staffing conflict?
Good point.
And within those camps, can you bring in outside vendors? Like if you have a science, group that wants to come in, and maybe can we open that up to vendors to see if, they want to do, I don't know, I think it would be interesting to see the structure, and I think we need to be really intentional in our long-term pursuit of this, of what that's going to look like and how it's going to impact the kids and what we want it to be as a system, whether it's just enrichment and here's a week versus, a continuous program.
I think you heard many of us saying we'd be patient to get good, to get great,
Okay.
and
We're
fair.
focused on.
And fair.
And I would see our role as being permissive as opposed to prescriptive. It's going to take local school leadership to know what their community needs. We'll support.
Okay.
With no new camps for this year.
Are we way ahead of schedule?
Yeah.
Okay.
But
I'm
we
pretty
have-
sure I've been up here as long as I
What do you say? You're like,
That's the closed session.
Must have been everybody else went really fast.
Madam Chair, if you want to go into
That's
closed.
what I was about to say. I thought it was-
No, closed. We can do some
The
business.
dignity of schools folks who have the press.
We can do some more.
Closed session right there.
Oh, that's what I was referring to. Yes, I'm sorry, I would have clarified. Yes,
So, Madam Chair, will you entertain a motion to go into closed session?
yes, I sure will. Thank you very much.
If you will, then I'll make a motion to consider going into closed session to consider confidential personal information protected in the GS 143-318.11A1, A3, and A6 and 115C-319 to consult with an attorney employed or retained by the board in order to preserve the attorney-client privileges provided in GS 143-318.11A3, to consult with the board's attorney in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege and to discuss Wake County Board of Education versus GW Grand Inc. and all Wake County Superior Court File 15 CBS 16712 and the Bankers Insurance versus State of North Carolina and all Wake County Superior Court File 16 CBS 015454. To consult with the board's attorney in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege and to discuss Schaefer et al. Versus Wake County Board of Education et al. Wake County Superior Court case number 16 CBS 011344. To consult with the board's attorney in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege and to discuss NV versus Wake County Board of Education Office of Administrative Hearings 15 EDC 08808 and to consider confidential student information protected under GS 115C-402 and the Family Education and Privacy Rights Act 20 U.S. Code 1232G.
Thank you, sir.
Second?
Thank you. Oh, thank you very much, Mrs. Tucker. We have a motion and a second, so we can go to closed session. Mr.
All in
Roy?
favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Do we have- Oh, Mr. Agee, I didn't see you come in. I can't, these are for his, so.
I think you can inhaler it.
Yeah, we are.
Leave